और अब रुख करते हैं अमेरिका का, जहां से एक बड़ा अजीबो-गरीब ऐलान सामने आया है। अमेरिकी वज़ीर ख़ारजा मार्को रूबियो ने जुमेरात को फ्रांस और जो दीगर ममालिक हैं उन पर तनकीद की है। ये वो ममालिक हैं जो कि फ़लस्तीनी रियासत को तस्लीम करने की जानिब बढ़ रहे हैं, और फ़लस्तीन को रियासत तस्लीम करने वाले ममालिक को ख़बरदार किया गया है अमेरिका की तरफ से कि फ़लस्तीन को अगर रियासत तस्लीम किया तो मसाइल आपके बढ़ जाएंगे और रद्द-ए-अमल भी आएगा। ये जुमला कहा गया है मार्को रूबियो की तरफ से। अब सुलेमान अहमद साहब हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं, इंडिपेंडेंट जर्नलिस्ट हैं, बरतानिया में मुकीम हैं। उनसे इस हवाले से बात करते हैं। अस्सलाम वालेकुम सुलेमान।
Alaikum assalam. Thanks for having me on.
Suleiman, thank you for giving us your time for the show. Now, let's start our discussion with what Marco Rubio has said, and he has said that countries will have to face consequences. So, can we say that Marco Rubio just gave a threat to all the countries?
Well, he kind of did. He gave them an ultimatum because you've got a number of countries that are planning to recognize Palestine as a state. And what's unique about this is obviously there are a large number of countries that have already recognized the state of Palestine. Hundreds of countries have. But I guess what makes this more unique is now you're getting into the Western European countries that are also planning to do so, as well as Canada. And so you're left with a scenario where Spain, Italy, Norway, France, possibly the United Kingdom, although their kind of statements are a lot more in the gray area, possibly unlikely that they will recognize Palestine as a state. That being said, it is indeed a threat because obviously we know the United States of America is essentially the arm of the Israeli government, and therefore they're using their power to essentially blackmail countries into not going ahead with it. He also tried to minimize the move as well and say that it had no real substance. And I guess from that perspective, it is a little bit true because in reality, you do need the United States of America to come on board to recognize the state of Palestine, to have a situation where it will be substantiated. Because to recognize the state, you need not everyone, but you generally need the bigger superpower to agree. But more than that, you need Israel to comply. Because what does it mean to have a state? You need sovereignty. You need control over your land, sea, and air, something the Palestinians have never had. So, of course, the country of Palestine's always existed, but in terms of its sovereignty, that's something the Israelis have stopped from happening for a very long time.
Well, you're right in saying that Israel is not complying with any rules, any regulations, any law, even with the ICJ, ICC rulings, and we've seen statements by world leaders about what Israel is doing. What do you think? How far will it go?
Well, I think unfortunately it goes to the end. Israel clearly is not going to comply. Israel has no plans to comply. And Israel is doing what it wants. You saw during the war with Iran, the United States of America was in negotiations, in discussions with Iran. They gave Iran a promise. They gave them their word that there would be no attack on them while the negotiations are ongoing. There was a plan for the negotiations to occur on the Sunday. And the United States of America told them, look, there's not going to be no bombing. Israel's not going to attack you while we're going to, due to the fact that we're having ongoing negotiations and we're going to have physical negotiations in terms of in person on the Sunday. Despite that being the case, Israel bombed. And so what that tells you is that Israel doesn't listen to the United States of America. It doesn't listen to international law. It acts completely on its own in terms of all aspects of decision making. And their real goal is to have expansion. So they plan to take and occupy the entirety of the West Bank. That's part of the Rubio conversation because you had a few days ago a statement come out that they plan to annex 60% of the West Bank. There was a statement by Smotrich that said 80%. And just yesterday, Smotrich was speaking about 100% of the West Bank. Hamas isn't a part of the West Bank, and therefore it just demonstrates this is not about Hamas. This is about taking control of the entirety of Palestine. So they plan to take over the entirety of the West Bank. They released the Gaza plan, which was again the Israeli government taking control over it and building on it. So again, they plan to take out the entirety of the Gaza. That plan was released in the Washington Post. And then you have it where South Lebanon, they plan to take South Lebanon. They already tried to cause civil unrest within South Lebanon amongst Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. So they plan to expand into Lebanon up to definitely the Litani River, possibly up to Beirut as well. And then you've also got the Syria. They've already started demilitarizing everything below Damascus in Syria. They've started to take control over the David corridor, which is the eastern part of Syria. and then you know that they're going to plan to go again into Iran. Some experts claim that this may even happen this month. Others think that it'll happen by the end of the year. Obviously, others think it'll happen in a more delayed fashion. But that being said, there is definitely this idea of expansionism within Israel, and therefore there'll be nothing that stops them. It doesn't matter if it's the United States of America, even though United States of America is beholden to them because of the control that they have over the United States, or the international community, whether it's the ICC or the ICJ or any kind of international law. It clearly just does not apply.
Exactly. This is what we are seeing, that Israel is not even listening to the United States of America. So, what do you think? Why is the recognition of Palestinian statehood seen as a red line by these people, these politicians in Washington who are in power, while recognizing other breakaway or occupied states like Kosovo or Taiwan, that is supported?
Well, that's because they were in the interest of the United States of America. So Kosovo was to cause, again, civil unrest within that region. Taiwan is because of the super chips. And so you've basically got an internal benefit for it. In terms of Israel, there is no internal benefit, but because Israel controls the United States government through various lobby groups such as AIPAC, they control them through the blackmailing operations such as Epstein, or career opportunities where if somebody does sell out to AIPAC, they get an opportunity to become famous or rich or whatever it may be. So Israel has complete control of the United States of America, and that's the reason why the US is beholden to them, even though it's not in their interest to do so. It's in the interest of the United States of America to have a Palestinian state, because to have a Palestinian state means that they're moving towards the Abraham Accords. It means that they're going to have, they already have good relations with the GCC countries, but the GCC countries are in a situation where their populace do want a Palestinian state, and therefore they're in this quandary where they have to promise a Palestinian state before having any kind of normalization agreement with Israel. That being said, Israel's never going to give a Palestinian state, and therefore, for that reason, well, is never going to allow a Palestinian state, and for that reason, then the United States of America is beholden to them.
So, as you said, Israel will never allow a Palestinian state. And at this point in time, we see that it is Israel versus 140 odd countries, because around 140 countries have accepted Palestine as a state. So, in September, this number will go up. So, all these countries versus Israel, what kind of a scenario is this?
Yeah, it's a scenario which kind of demonstrates this power dynamic that is occurring right now, which is essentially the world goes where the United States of America goes. And because the US isn't forcing Israel, and they don't have the ability to do so, Israel's then able to act autonomously. Yeah, you're right. Look, what it demonstrates is the whole world can be against the actions of Israel. I mean, the whole world is against the genocide that's happening in Gaza. If you look at the vast majority of the populace, they're against it. Even internally within countries, you have, take any of these countries, take the United Kingdom where I'm in, the vast majority of people are against Israel. The vast majority of people speak out against the genocide in Gaza, but then they completely control and occupy our government. The same with the US. Studies now show that the vast majority of American citizens are against the genocide that's happening in Gaza. But that being the case, the US government is completely occupied and controlled by them. And so you have a scenario where they're able to act in the manner they're doing. But what it does do is diminish this kind of American idea of morality and ethics, because they were always or presented themselves as the arbiter of truth and falsehood, of morality, of good and evil. And now what they've demonstrated is by supporting Israel, they no longer have this kind of moral high ground.
Now, coming back to what Rubio said, what kind of severe consequences is Rubio referring to? Maybe economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or is it something else?
Well, they can't diplomatically isolate the European countries, but what they could possibly do is put tariffs on them, increase the tariffs. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that yeah, that'll be the likely possibility, is to increase the tariffs. The other possibility is to do something directly against Palestine, which would mean annexation of the West Bank, to say, look, you've tried to recognize the Palestinian state without our permission, therefore now Israel gets to annex the entirety of the West Bank. Obviously they were going to do that anyway, but this gives them the excuse to do so. But then that's again stealing the land of the Palestinians to give to Israel. Other possibility, yeah, I would say those are the main possibilities. Tariffs, they won't sanction these European countries, but then they'll probably allow the annexation of the West Bank.
So, if let's say if West Bank is annexed, do you see any other countries standing up and looking at the USA eye to eye, and say that this is not happening, this is wrong?
I don't think so. What we've seen by the international community is they've largely remained silent during a genocide that's happened in Gaza. I mean, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people who've been killed, hundreds of thousands of children have been killed. Likely millions have been injured with and so when you have that scenario and the international community has not been able to do anything, not been able to stand up against them, not been able to isolate them, then what you're left with is a scenario where if they were to annex the West Bank, I don't see any country doing anything. I think this is a scenario where what it kind of does demonstrate is that the PA has been control of the West Bank, and the PA, largely speaking, has been quite open to the Israelis in terms of their decision making, trying to negotiate with them, trying to speak with them, trying to allow them into the West Bank when they want to, and the result is they lose the West Bank. And then on the other hand, you have the Gaza model, which is Hamas, who have resisted physically against the oppression that they've been dealing with. And I just don't mean Hamas, I mean the entire resistance. And so when the entire resistance has done that, and then they are attempting to take the entirety of the Gaza, what that demonstrates is actually staying quiet and not physically resistant means you lose the entirety of your land. And at least with Hamas, they have, been able to, Hamas and the resistance have been able to physically fight against the takeover of Gaza.
And what do you think? How enforceable or realistic these threats of Marco Rubio or USA are?
I think they're really realistic and really enforceable. So, in terms of putting tariffs on the EU or these specific European countries, as well as Canada, as well as Australia, that's something Trump could easily do. In terms of sanctioning world leaders or politicians from those countries, depending on what country is, it's possible. You've seen the Trump administration, for example, sanction Francesca Albanese, who was a UN rapporteur. So they've sanctioned Karim Khan, who is the ICC prosecutor, a British citizen. And so there clearly is this ability to sanction. There's clearly this ability to tariff. There's already tariffs on there, which Trump does increase and decrease depending on the situation. Recently, they put larger sanctions on India because of their trade with Russia. And so those possibilities are definitely there. And in terms of the annexation of the West Bank, we've seen it happen in real time. The Israelis have been continuing to increase their control over the West Bank, and that's just going to continue to happen.
And what kind of response can we accept from the countries that are being sanctioned or being threatened?
I mean, in terms of these countries specifically, some of these countries did apply dual tariffs back onto the US, but then they found that that wasn't beneficial and they were a lot more open to conversation. You saw Canada, for example, increase tariffs onto the United States of America. Then both, or really Canada, kind of capitulated and decreased their tariffs. China, and as you know, China, who probably had the strongest possibility to fight against the tariffs, had this tariff war with the US, and then both kind of subsided and came to an agreement. So no, I don't see any of these countries being able to do anything.
And do you think this could backfire by accelerating recognition efforts as an act of defiance?
But what do you mean by other countries?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, I'd say largely most of the countries have recognized Palestine. I don't see many other countries that haven't that would jump on. The countries that haven't are already very much Zionist controlled. Obviously, all these other countries are Zionist controlled, but with that one, it's a lot more over. So, for example, Holland aren't going to recognize because he's very much anti-Islam Zionist control. Argentina aren't Malay because again, same thing. So there's a few countries which likely wouldn't based on their own kind of leaders. But generally speaking, most of the countries who were to recognize Palestine, probably by the end of this meeting or this UN meeting in September, will probably already have.
And finally, what do you think Donald Trump has in mind? I mean, changing the name of Department of Defense to Department of War. I mean, he was the one who said that he's opposed to war and he wanted to end all wars. Obviously, he hasn't been successful. But what do you think? Is MAGA all about ruining relationships with other countries?
Well, yeah. I mean, he did campaign on no further wars. He campaigned on ending the wars. He's not ended the Ukraine-Russia war. He continues to provide Ukraine with financial support and arms. He hasn't stopped the Gaza genocide. He continues. He's given Israel more money than anybody else has. It's almost $20 billion, not counting the financial implications of the specific direct American support. He also, in terms of now, the South America and Venezuela, there does seem to be clear attempts to go to direct conflict with them. He's moved warships towards them. They just a couple of days ago directly attacked a boat of Venezuelans, we believe it is, who allegedly, according to him, were carrying drugs. We don't know. There was no trial, but they bombed and killed them, which goes against this whole idea of justice, having a trial, the Constitution. So clearly, when it comes to war, there is this kind of over decision to be a lot more warmongering from when it comes to Trump's side. And his claims of like subsiding previous wars, he claims that he stopped the India-Pakistan war. There is a possibility he was probably involved. There likely was a possibility that both countries agreed to it, irrespective of him. But generally speaking, yeah, it's very disappointing in terms of when you look at it from a war perspective, his actions.